How's everybody doing? Good. So mental disorders is our topic, and I thought rather than just jumping into the subject in a technical way, I'd start with kind of a case. So if you look in your packet, you have some cases in your packet around page 18. Now this first case, when you initially look at the symptoms, you think this is not a mental disorder case. This is a woman presenting with a skin problem. This, in fact, diagnosed by a quite renowned Chinese medicine dermatologist, was that she had allergic eczema. As you read the case, you see that here's this woman traveling, suddenly has these macules, these red spots appear on her skin that are really itchy. And the patient herself volunteers this information. I think the cause of this is now that I'm traveling, I'm eating a lot of strange foods. She particularly associated with some seafood she had eaten. I must have gotten some kind of allergic reaction. So this Chinese medicine dermatologist says, oh, well, allergies generally are a reaction of the body when it produces either heat or damp or a combination of that, right? And you see that people who have a lot of food allergies often have, we see it a lot in our pediatric practice, right? All that mucus-producing stuff, that's the damp reaction. Or people get heat. You see that more commonly with the skin things. And so his diagnosis, oh, you have skin heat produced by this allergic reaction, and so he gave this formula Lian Chao Baidusan. And the outcome wasn't very good from this. I don't know if you know this formula. There are a lot of these Baidusan formulas. They're all overcome toxin powders, and so they really rid the body of all this heat toxin, right? And of course, this, instead of helping her skin, actually made her skin get worse. But there's another really significant component. She was emotionally agitated, very nervous and restless and not sleeping well, so even before she had the skin problem. And when taking this heat-clearing thing, she got more emotionally agitated. Not only that, of course, she started to itch a lot. When we see this case, first of all, the diagnosis was probably wrong. Let's just work through it, just, to be comprehensive in a sense. Usually when you see macules are flat lesions, right? Unlike papules and pustules and vesicles that raise up off the skin. And so when you see a flat lesion, the relative amount of excess there is not very great. Because when you get a skin problem that raises up, then you've got a lot of excess to clear. So there's a clue already, the fact that these are flat lesions, that this person isn't very excess. But we do see some element of heat because they're red. So when we look at a lesion, we look at whether it's raised, meaning excess, whether it goes down into the skin, meaning deficiency, right? Like we see a lot of deficiency skin lesions that look hot and toxic. Older folks who get these stasis ulcers on their legs, for example. We often see a mistake made here by modern biomedicine. They see this elderly person with a stasis ulcer on their legs, maybe after they've had the veins stripped from for a cardiac bypass, something like that, and they get this wound that just won't heal. And what's the Western guy do? He gives them lots of antibiotics. And it doesn't work. Well, because antibiotics are basically heat-clearing medicine, right? They attack heat and toxin in the body. It's no different than if he had given her, herbs like puganyin or something like that to clear the heat on the skin. It's not healing. And so then finally they drag themselves around for alternative treatments and they come to us. Clearly this person has deficiency because this is an ulcer moving into the skin. If the person had true heat excess, it would be a pustule raising up off the skin. Right? So like we see that a lot in kids. They get actually same organism that's causing the stasis ulcer in the elderly person is causing impetigo in the child. And impetigo looks totally different. Impetigo, they've got these pustules that then break and make this yellow crust, dries on their, usually it's around their mouth, or even there, see the difference? On the upper part of the body, you can see the excess and the heat rising, and then it's coming out. And so then you get this yellow crust dried on there, and then the kid wants to give you a big hug. And you're like, well, there's some kind of, strep or staph there, and the antibiotics work great for that, by the way. not that we can't treat it, because that's easy to treat. It's this kind of excess heat and damp in the body. You can give herbs or even, a lot of times just even acupuncture and surface cleaning of that, and the impetigo gets better. Relatively easy to clear the excess. So instead of it coming out like that, showing all the excess in the body, it's going in. It's on the lower body. The skin is eroding. The ulcer is going in. So what do you end up giving that person? Blood tonics. And as they take the blood tonics, now they can actually deliver blood to that area. That's what's going to clear the heat and toxin. So you could give them, all these heat clearers all day, and it's never healing. And then you give them the blood tonics, and usually we give them a combination, don't we? Blood tonics and blood vitalizers, blood movers. Because not only do you got to get more blood in the body, you have to deliver it to that area. And again, we're usually talking about a more elderly person, and as the process of aging goes, we typically get blood stagnation. So they're not, even if they have enough blood, it doesn't get down there to their legs. So as you say, with skin problems, we have flat, raised, or moving in, and they tell us something about how we need to approach that person. So right off the fact that, we do see allergic eczemas with lots of raised bumps. She didn't have that. She had flat lesions. They itch a lot. We have to wonder, what kind of itching is this? There's a general rule that you can apply. If you ask the person, did your itching appear on the skin before the skin made a change, before a lesion of some kind appeared? If that's the case, it tells you that the condition is more interior to the body. Usually we say it's internal wind, often generated by blood deficiency, something like that. Whereas on the other hand, if the skin lesion appears first, yes, my skin got red, these bumps came out, something like that, and then the itching appeared. That's usually external wind, because what's happened is the damage to the skin has allowed the wind to enter. And that's important to us because we'll treat those two differently, won't we? If we say, oh, you have a lot of skin itching, but it's of an internal type, again, I need to draw down internal wind. We have all kinds of treatments for that, usually involving treating the liver meridian with points and treating with herbs like gotung, these descending, as opposed to a person who's like somebody gets hives. You'll notice when somebody gets hives because they ate some food they're allergic to, they actually get the hive and then the itching starts. Then you give surface releasing treatment. You can use all your wind points. You can use large intestine 4 and triple warmer 5 and all of your surface herbs, because that's going to push the wind back out. So you have to decide, where does this wind come from? Now, we don't have the advantage here of having that information. I would suspect, though, if carefully questioned, and if she noticed at all, that probably the itching came before the red spots. She was already starting to itch, and then the red spots occurred. And most very likely, in fact, the more she scratched, the more red spots appeared. That would be very characteristic of this type of presentation. So I said the diagnosis was wrong, where this dermatologist called this thing allergic eczema. In fact, she has more what we would label something like neurodermatitis. Very characteristic of neurodermatitis is the more you, again, this is one of those meaningless Western terms they love to put a diagnosis on, doesn't really tell you much, but there is a distinction between allergic dermatitis and neurodermatitis, because neurodermatitis has the characteristic of the more you scratch and itch, and then the more it develops, and it keeps growing, sort of, the more you fool with it. And hence the term neurodermatitis, indicating somehow it has to do with an overstimulation of the nerves. So I would guess that she had the itching before the thing appeared. Now, she was complaining of this emotional agitation. In fact, the reason she was traveling is she just had a relationship breakup. And so she decided that, to kind of get away from that and get away from that scene, that she would be traveling. She was very fatigued. It was such an emotional trauma for her and all, dealing with this breakup. I chose this case as our first example because this was actually, I watched this case being treated, but it was actually done by a teacher of mine who I was studying Shen and Jing with them. It was in China, in Jinan. And he saw this woman, and he goes, "Oh, this is a perfect case for Guajertong." And so he gave her straight out Guajertong. And I'm thinking, can't we add something for the skin in there? You know, his name is Professor Wang Xinlu, and I said, Professor Wang, can we put something to clear the surface a little more than Guajertong? I was like uncomfortable with this diagnosis. So, and if you ever met Professor Wang, he actually is a very high-level political official. Besides his doctoring duties, he's the head of the Chinese government's Chinese Medicine Bureau, like, you know. And so, as you could, he's the kind of guy when you drive around with him, police salute and stuff as his car goes by. You know, that still happens, sort of. And so, you know, that kind of guy, you know, he has a way of looking at you with like this melting scorn, you know. Like the fact that I was questioning him, wondering why we couldn't put, he says, no, this, you have to see, look at her tongue, look at her pulse, look at the fact that these are, we have the additional advantage of noticing that this cold clearing of toxin approach really produced a negative reaction. You can see this was a total misunderstanding of the case that this dermatologist had when he gave her all this heat and toxin clearing. Instead, so this is emotional agitation. It's not a skin problem. And that emotional agitation is an empty heat expressing out through the surface. And so Guajertong, he thought, was the perfect one because it does control the surface of the body. At the same time, it's tonifying the interior. It's going to prevent that emotional. Remember, one of the main indications for Guajer is some kind of disturbance of the Shen. And so I thought it was interesting for us to start with this as our first case. Guajertong actually is a formula that regulates the mind. And in fact, we have a variation of that called Guajer Jia Gui Tong, means Guajer formula adding more Guajer. So Jia Gui. So Guajer Jia Gui, add more Guajer. And so normally we say that there's a proportion in the Guajertong formula of Guajer, which goes outward into the surface and is releasing in some way of any external evils. But also the Guajer is in the formula because it redirects heat to where it belongs in the body. Now, when we usually use Guajertong, we use it for, there's usually fever. And so it's redirecting the heat of the fever, the heat of battle. And usually they say what's happening is the heat is rising up into the deficiency, and that's agitating the Shen. So always people who have a Guajer indication, often they call them the Guajertong type of person, they're usually pale, cold, a little vulnerable to pathogens and so forth, but they always have some emotional agitation. They're always sensitive emotionally. We see this a lot in kids. You end up in your practice seeing a lot of Guajer types of kids because the Western guys don't have, you know, they go to the pediatrician with his kid and say, my kid's a little sensitive, they're cold, their appetite's not so good, they're more tired than I think they should be, they have always a little runny nose. And the pediatrician doesn't have anything for that. Okay, if they were really overtly sick, oh, then I'd have something. I could really give them antibiotics. But the way you're presenting, that's just who they are. Well, to us, yes, but it's not quite balanced. You know, and so that's usually a very emotionally sensitive kind of kid. Right? Thin, pale, cold, tired, cries easily, gets upset. You can't yell at that kind of kid. Right? That's always a disaster. You know, you yell at that kid and they overreact to it and you end up apologizing. Parents are always in a quandary about this. I don't know how to discipline my kid because any discipline seems to be overwhelming to them, right? It's really typical of a we would say a Guajer type of child. You know? So that formula has the Guajer, which is designed also in there to calm the Shen, and then it has the peony root in that formula to nourish the inside, to be a little astringent. So you have the Guajer, which kind of has an outward direction. You have the peony root, which has an inward direction. And so you're actually reestablishing the qi mechanism of the body. This is why Guajertong is called in Chinese Tian Sha Di Yifang, means the first formula under heaven. It's the first formula under heaven because one reason is that it helps to reestablish one of the most important aspects of our chi machine in our body, the inward and outward regulation of things. It's also the first formula under heaven because in its adjustments, it then is used to create so many of our other formulas. For example, you can go to the water clearing formulas of Lingui Zhugan-tang, or Wuling San, or Zhuling Tang, or all of these are a progression of the adjustment of cinnamon formula. So you take his basic formula, you start adding and subtracting things, and then Lingui Zhugan-tang becomes things like Sijunzatang. And then once you got Sijunzatang, the four gentlemen, then you got Liu Junzatang, and so the first formula under heaven is this Guijitang. And I say it's not only used to make a it reestablishes the chi mechanism. And we're going to see how important that is for mental disorders in a minute. So anyway, just to finish off our case here. So this woman, she takes the Guijitang, and by the next day is markedly improved. Less skin itching. She slept well that night. Within 2 days, the skin was clear. After several days of suffering like this, even worse after taking these cold herbs, a radical improvement immediately from what's for me an almost unexpected prescription, right? Because I didn't see this either when I first encountered her as an emotional problem. I was also drawn in by the skin symptoms. So, but it was the emotional agitation somehow expressing out, and she became, and this brings up it actually says in many classical books dealing with skin symptoms that there is an element of heart always in skin problems. That's the reason the body chooses to express out through the complexion, through the outward appearance. The fact that you show it that way is often a sign of a heart Shen component in the skin problem. So that's kind of interesting that we have to think about why do some people choose to have a skin problem manifest out. It does affect how others are reacting to you, how your Shen is shining out through the surface of your body. So I think she had a lot of emotional repression after her relationship breakup. She thought she could solve it by traveling. I suspect she felt more isolated. Suddenly traveling, she's by herself, she doesn't know anybody, everything's strange, there's no support structure. So now, how can she create even more drama outward? How can she release that? It came out through her skin. So she's in a strange place, doesn't really know anybody, suddenly her skin erupts like this. And by calming her heart with the Guijitang, then her skin problem radically improved. So anyway, so that's the sort of introduction to how the mind is sitting underneath of a lot of these things. Let's go now. We're going to do a lot more cases. Andrew requested that maybe we do case kind of things a lot, so I'll try to do a lot of cases this weekend. But now that was sort of my introduction to now. So let's see. We said, there's something important going here. We use Guijitang, something about the chi mechanism and all of that. So let's look at the first page of our handout now, and we'll see how we get there. Confucius said this thing about the rectification of names, that it's so important what you call things, and that everybody speaks the same language, not the same Chinese, English, French language, the same language in terms when they say something, it means the same thing. I think particularly in this area of spirit and Shen and psychology and the like, people throw around terms like Shen and Hun and Po, and they mean different things to different people. So we should kind of get some sense of how we're going to use these terms. And in that process, we'll see what is this Shen that we're talking about. So basically we say that in the universe, there is Yang and Yin. Everybody knows these characters, right? Yang, these are the simplified characters, but they're very useful for this discussion because we can see in Yang and Yin, you have a sun and a moon here, right? right? So there's this little flag sort of radical here indicating that yang is the sun is an emblem for that, or that the moon is the emblem for yin in a way. So the universe basically has yang and yin moving in a chaotic way. It's the nature of things that yang and yin somehow repel and separate. Yang has a tendency to go in a certain direction. It rises up and moves outward. Yin has a tendency to go inward and downward. So they are so opposite. We often say, oh, they kind of depend on each other, and one engenders the other, and this and that. How can that happen? How can yin and yang engender and interact when their tendencies are totally opposite? And left to their own devices, you have this kind of thing called chaos. The way that happens is you need something in between to bring yin and yang together, to force their interaction. And that's when we go from the level of 2 to the level of 3. And the level of 3, we see heaven, man, and earth. And what's in here that brings yin and yang together, if we take yang is heaven, that is outward, above, the tendency of yang, and yin is earth, downward, inward. If you ever have a chance, there's a one-man play about the philosopher Buckminster Fuller. If you ever have a chance to see that one-man play, it's a delight. But this fellow, does a lot of characterization of Buckminster Fuller, and something that he would always do when he'd begin a lecture. He wouldn't say, please sit down to the audience. He'd say, please sit in. That's because you can only sit either in or out. So this is the nature of yin, is in, right? So we think of it down, but it's really in. So yin becomes earth, the inward. Yang becomes heaven. And what's added here is man. Why is man in the center? Because man has consciousness. It is thought that it is consciousness that unites yin and yang, forcing them to interact. In fact, without consciousness, we can't even talk about yin and yang or some kind of universe existing. It's a pointless discussion if there's nobody perceiving it. So the notion, these are seen as 3 equal partners. And this is why man in the center is bringing together. So really man is not really the right term. It's conscious beings. Consciousness, it unites yin and yang. It makes the universe have sense to it. A lot of modern authors like to say it's actually negative entropy being introduced. The tendency is for things to go to disorder. Yin and yang separate. But with consciousness, things can be ordered again. Things can come together. So we have this consciousness in between. So Shen is so important. Consciousness is so important as the unifying factor for yin and yang. And so then we see that we have the 3 treasures of the body. So the man then has his 3 treasures of consciousness. But consciousness is supported by qi. So this is Shen, qi, and our potential, our Jing. So this consciousness now becomes the top, the more yang aspect. It's supported by a more active level, the qi, which is dependent on an inactive level, the Jing, the potential, the essence that we have. And so we can see this is sort of a numerological expansion, because when we have these 3 aspects, Shen, Qi, and Jing, notice that, you see this character for Qi, is, actually, let's look at the other before we go on. It's important to see that this Shen character here, this is an altar in here. It comes from a thing like this. And so this is the phonetic. It just pronounced Shen. It actually, this by itself kind of means to explain. And so there's something about an altar connecting to the heavens or the unseen and being able to explain it is something about what Shen is. The Qi is often said to be some kind of rising vapor. And then we see rice added here. So in a more physiologic sense, they often use that version of qi with the rice character in there, that we have to get something we need out of the rice that we eat to engender this vapor in the body. And so we often say that this Shen, this ability to make a connection to the unseen and explain it, rides on these vapors that our physiology is producing like a rider on a horse. So many many mental problems are said to be either a problem of the rider not guiding the horse, as we saw in our first case, so the body physically dysfunctions because of the mental stresses, or the horse runs off with the rider. Often we say that people, when they try to ride a horse, are reduced from a rider to being a passenger because they can't control the horse runs off, does whatever it's want. And so this is when some kind of process physically in the body is taking the mind along for the ride. Notice we also have this, rice character again as a radical in the Jing. So some people say this indicates that the Jing does come from some kind of physical substances. As my old Korean mentor used to always say, the Jing is your trust fund that your parents put in there for you before you're born. And then you're going to go and waste that money as fast as you can. That's the normal process of living. Well, in fact, he said that's actually it would be better if you don't waste it. The idea is you have money in your trust fund coming from your parents. That money you then begin to extract and spend. That's your qi. Of course, you supplement that by your own work, which is breathing and eating. But you're always dependent a little bit on taking money gradually out of your trust fund. If you spend your trust fund wisely, you're actually using those funds to support your Shen, and your Shen grows in capacity. So that's the correct life, is to spend your Jing for the benefit of your Shen. And how do we know that the Shen is developing and growing? Because we have compassion for others, people spontaneously feel good being around us. Those kinds of things are a sign that our Shen is developing. On the other hand, if you spend your Jing for a lot of self-gratification, then instead you're actually nourishing your Po, not your Shen. We're going to talk about this. That is your self-interest. And that's kind of philosophically thought to be somewhat of a waste of your potential. Anyway, we have these three treasures. And then we can subdivide again and say within this, there are Shen, again, in a smaller sense. This is the Shen of the heart. The Qi level becomes here the E. The E, in many ways to translate this, it's an interesting character because even it's in the middle and relates to Qi, but it actually has two hearts in it. There's two little components that are hearts again. This is, everybody, I'm sure, is familiar with this character of heart, and this is a radical form of heart. So the E has two hearts. But we can say that the E has a lot to do with our intellect, processing of facts, and so forth. It's that kind of, it's hopefully the part of your psyche that you're using right now. You know, if you're instead thinking, oh, look at that person sitting over there, she's quite attractive, or oh, you're probably not using your E, you know, you're using some other part of your psyche. And there are a lot of students doing that, especially, you know, this group, most of y'all are practitioners, and but, you know, I teach a lot, very basic students through the years. And these days now, a lot of them sit behind their computer and they're surfing the web instead of, you know, and so they're probably not using their E, they're doing social networking. That's a different part of your psyche, you know. But so the Qi is said to mostly be engaged with the E. In fact, we're going to see this term in a minute here. Xingji means the mind, the heart machine. It's actually thinking, the thinking process. And then the Jing, here we see the Zhi. The Zhi, you can see, look, here's the earth. here, and we see the earth again. Right here, here again, we see the heart. So you see, so often, anything to do with mental faculties has this heart radical stuck in there, you know, showing that this is sort of the center of all that process going on. But we say this relates a lot to the very earthly process, and this is why this one is often given to it's about holding yourself upright. This faculty starts to diminish, you start to fall down, as we see in older folks. Older folks start to fall. You've got to treat this aspect of their mind so they can hold themselves up. It's really, and they have a million excuses why they fall down. They can't see as well. They have numbness in their feet because the blood vessels they have some dizziness. They have a gazillion reasons. Doesn't matter. Even if they tripped and they say, there's no reason I tripped, I just tripped. How often do we all trip? Not that much. How often do old people trip without any, they say, it was just spontaneous, there's nothing wrong with me. They're falling down because the upright nature of their mind is faltering as they're aging. So that's this decline here of the jerk. And so it's about holding ourselves upright, and that means also psychologically upright. It's our willpower, it's our fortitude, it's our ambition and drive, and so forth comes from that level. So we have three understandable ones. We have Shen directly carried across. We have the Qi in a mental sense being our E, our intellectual processing of facts and data, and then trying to at least remember for a little while what we experienced with that. And then we have our Zhi, which is coming from the Jing, our sort of upright stability and such. But we have two in between. We have Hun and Po. The Po here, this thing is a ghost. It's some kind of ghost. And this thing is indicating it's coming down from heaven. You can recognize these two bars here, these two strokes here, as the two strokes on the heaven character there. So this is the ghost from heaven. A lot of classical discussion debates the ordering of this. Is the Hun actually more important than the Shen? Is the Shen actually a term to apply to the sort of consciousness within us, and the something that comes from somewhere that lights us up initially? Is that really our Hun? Or does the Shen come from somewhere? Again, I think this is not really a debate. It's really a question of rectification of names. We have to decide which way we're going to call it. I was always taught by my mentor that Shen is the thing that comes from somewhere. Now, the debate happens. Where does it come from? Does it come from a past life, as the Buddhists would say? Does it come from your parents? There's a saying, I think you'll see it on the next page of your handout, but there's a saying that says, when the two Jing meet, the Shen is now present. What is that two Jing? They're talking about the Jing of the parents coming together at the moment of conception. They talk about the mother gives you her fertile blood. Hence, she's contributing red-colored Jing. And the father gives you his sperm, his semen. They call that the white-colored Jing. And isn't it interesting that the red is from the mother, red is fire, said to be from above. The white is more like metal, right? It's below, but that comes from the father. They say this is the process of what happens in sexual arousal. In sexual arousal, the father is lifting yin upward. That's why he gets an erection. The mother, she's moving blood downward, so she gets lubrication. So the process of sexual arousal is actually already a transformation of yin and yang. The man is turning yin into yang, and the woman is turning yang into yin. Then they have sex with each other. Then they exchange yin and yang with each other. The yin that the man has made yang through his erection, he then passes over at the moment of orgasm to the woman. So the woman gets relatively more yang from the sexual activity. The man, on the other hand, is receiving yin from the woman. He gets relatively more yin. So naturally, after orgasm, women want to have some emotional engagement because they've just gotten a dose of yang. Men, on the other hand, want to turn over and go to sleep because they've just gotten a dose of yin. So then they get a divorce, because he doesn't love me anymore. But in fact, they've exchanged yin and yang, and it's a natural reaction. We're going to talk about sexual dysfunction this weekend as a part of, that's typically included as a part of mental disorders in Chinese medicine. So we'll talk about sexual dysfunctions. And my teacher would say that this Shen could come from your parents when the two Jing meet, but this two Jing maybe is being thought of too limited there. Maybe they actually mean the two potentials of yin and yang. Maybe it's coming from, and some people then start to talk about a universal mind, a universal Shen that we are a piece of. And we see many philosophical traditions of China that recognize that there is a sort of universal consciousness that's holding yin and yang together, not limited to any single individual, that we're all part of, and temporarily we have a little piece of that contained within us, so that in fact our Shen is actually a piece of this universal consciousness that's inside. So who knows? Does it come from your parents? Some say, for example, maybe you know that's famous as the treat the earth first mentality. He was the school of nourish the spleen. You know, a lot of herbal formulas come from him, all these spleen tonic, because he was, and my teacher, by the way, was really an avid member of that school. The Korean practitioners, in fact, tend to like that train of thought. They say all problems ultimately result from bad digestion. You know, and if there is a digestive problem, if you don't treat that, forget about getting any kind of results. So Li Dongyuan says, the Shen is nothing more than the process of the qi working. That's a really modern physiological view. That the modern biomedical docs would love that, right? Because that's the idea that there's this physiologic process in the body, and it produces electrical potentials and things, and eventually we experience that as consciousness, but the consciousness doesn't need to come from somewhere. It's not some kind of elevated thing. It's almost the byproduct of physiologic process. Li Dongyuan was a big advocate of that notion, that it was, you know, it was actually a process basically of your spleen functioning, and now you were eating and digesting, and then of course, as a result of that qi produced, you had some kind of awareness. So many different thoughts were represented in ancient philosophies about where this Shen comes from. I don't know that we can solve that in this class. You have to decide what you think is the source of that. And in any case, the Shen is present, and we have this relatively more yang, this ghost from heaven. And the way I like to define this Hun is about our Shen being able to engage and reach outward beyond ourselves. In fact, it is often said that this Hun is what allows us to actually reach back towards the universal mind, the universal Shen. If we can understand anything about something greater than ourselves, it's through our Hun carrying our limited consciousness that's within us outward. And one way it does that is through engaging with others. So we often say that this ghost reaches out, connects to others. There were actually said to be 3 types of Shen classically. There's the Shen that's the 3 types of Hun. There's the Hun that's in plants, the one that's in animals, and the one that's in humans. And that the human one is the human Hun is the most developed in that it has the most free will acting. Animals are sort of subject to the whims of the circumstance around them, and plants even more so, and humans have the capacity to try to make change of their circumstance. And it's our Hun that's doing that. It's going out, changing our circumstance, and interacting with others, and then maybe we'll see this idea of the Hun reaching out to the universal mind when we talk about dreams later, because there are 5 kinds of dreams in Chinese medicine, and one kind is so-called true dreaming, where your Hun travels to the universal mind, and then you learn things, you get guidance, you get knowledge about the future. That was recognized in Chinese medicine as possible through your Hun communicating outward. We often say that any kind of activity while asleep is dependent on the Hun. Your Shen is kind of, at that moment, not so engaging. It's your Hun that's active. And we see this, again, referring back to pediatrics. Kids are really, really prone to this. They have a lot of activity while they sleep. they're moving and flopping and walking and talking and all of that, it's because their hun isn't settled. And why isn't their hun settled? Because kids by nature have excess livers. And the hun is settled in the liver. So it tells you something. Anybody who does too much while they're asleep, you better regulate the liver. If it was a Shen problem, they wouldn't be sleeping. But they're busy while they're sleeping. That's a hun problem. Think about how about non-restorative sleep? Don't you have a lot of patients have that? They say, I sleep enough, I'm still not rested. All you chronic fatigue patient, fibromyalgic patient, that's a classic fibromyalgia indicator. One of the things you see in fibromyalgia is non-restorative sleep. You know that person's got to have a liver problem. Right? So fibromyalgia, you're always regulating the liver. Chronic fatigue, you're often regulating the liver. We're going to talk about the chronic fatigue later in the class, but just to say at this point, I think chronic fatigue often gets misdiagnosed as a totally deficient phenomenon. And if you treat it as strictly deficiency with lots of tonic treatment, it takes a long time to get better. And if you see that it's a mixed thing, as it are many mental disorders, and you clear Qi stagnation and heat in the liver, for example, they make a lot faster improvement. After all, it's very typical, isn't it, that chronic fatigue follows a period of stress. And so it's not just that the stress is depleting the heart qi or whatever, that we always say stress makes the heart grow tired, it depletes the heart qi and yin. But it also stagnates the qi in the liver. And the clue would be the person can have non-restorative sleep. They can sleep, the Shen can become quiet, but they can't disengage enough while they're sleeping to actually get rest. What's the herb for that? It's Swanzalren, right? Swanzalren, we often say, it's a heart herb, but really it's sour, and it goes to the liver, and it makes liver blood. So Swanzalren really makes the hun quiet. Maybe if we want to talk about an herb like Yuan Zhi I think of as a more direct Shen herb. But Swanzalren, so famous as a sleep herb, a lot of people like to make this, you toast the Swanzalren and you make a drink out of it, like a coffee. It's very pleasant tasting, but you can take that at night. Right? So instead of taking some stimulating drink at night, you take the Swanzalren tea at night, just a single herb tea. It's very soothing. You can even mix that with, I have some patients who like to mix it with hot chocolate. Okay, chocolate has a little stimulant in it, but you make a hot chocolate with some warm milk and you put Swanzalren in there. It's a kind of a sort of slightly sour, bitter quality. It's very pleasant tasting. And you really just feel like your sleep is deeper and more restful and more relaxing. You can cure a lot of disorders that way without treating specifically what the person has. Because suddenly they can replenish themselves. So anyway, so there we have the hun in between the Shen here, the thinking process here. Here is that thinking process and the Shen being able to move outward some way. And then we have the Po. The Po, again, you can see ghosts here, right? So there's two ghosts. This thing is a ghost radical, Gui, but this is white. So this is the white ghost. A lot of debate about why it's a white ghost. What does that mean? Let me see if I have any suggestions. Beyond what most authors say is, it's white because that's contained in the lung. So it's metal, so it's white color. But some people say that this white here actually has other indications. For example, one, it can be somehow a reference to self. It's your own individual ghost. This is connection to self, whereas the hun was connection to others. The hun is moving outward, the Po is moving inward. So you see, it's between mind and potential, mind and earth. It's more in the more yin part. So this is more inward moving, more about body. And we see problems of the Po in a psychological way. They're a lot about self-aggrandizing behavior, self-caring, for example, people who have Shen disturbances where they no longer care for themselves physically. They let themselves become dirty, they don't eat, and so forth. They say that's how the Po is involved. Whereas a lot of people with Shen disturbances actually have Hun problems. They abuse others. They act out towards others. When you somehow are acting inward, then that's the Po side of things. So basically we have a consciousness and a willpower here, heaven and earth, with thinking and mental activity in between, and then reaching out and reaching in. Oh, by the way, this Po also controls a lot of things we wouldn't consider exactly psychological, but mental in the sense of coordination, dexterity, things like that. So, for example, we see a lot of kids who are clumsy, who accident-prone. It's hard. Accident-prone is tricky to say with kids because there's so many causes for that. For example, kids are excess yang. They're relatively more yang and don't have so much yin. So they knock things over a lot. They bang into things. They don't watch what they're doing. That's excess yang. It's not a Po problem per se. It's just that too much yang. I mean, you just see it. You know, kid, just go to a restaurant, like go to Chuck E. Cheese or one of those terrible kids' restaurants, and you see what the meaning of excess yang is in kids. Like they're running around and yelling and knocking stuff down off the tables. So that kind of accident and injury, that's not a Po problem. We also see kids who have a lot of internal dampness become kind of clumsy because the dampness obstructs the normal flow of qi. Those kids are often really messy. It's interesting how dampness on the interior expresses outward as messiness in the environment. But a kid who just lacks, and we often see these kids, right, who are often quite intelligent, they like to read and stuff, but try to have them do a sport. Impossible. They just, you know, so they're the kid who likes to sit in the back corner reading while the other kids are playing a game in school or something, a physical game or something. They don't want to be involved in it. They're just not good at it. They never get picked to be on somebody's team because they're going to, you know, they usually have weakness of the Po. And in fact, it often helps those kids to tonify their lung. Tonifying their lung qi actually helps to bring out a certain dexterity, a certain athleticism in them. So this Po has a sort of mental side in that brain, we would say brain aspect in our modern thinking about it. And so when you have these 5 attributes of Shen, Hun, Yi, Po, and Zhi, they divide into 2 processes. Our Qi Ji, the one we often talk about as physiology, our Qi machine, our Qi mechanism, and our Xingji, our heart mechanism. Really this means our thinking process. So we have thinking and physical processes going on as a result of this. We bring yin and yang together. I mean, it's the classic thing, isn't it? I'm sure you studied back in your introduction to Oriental Medicine class that it is this arrangement that heaven is above, it's yang, earth is below, or inward, it's yin, and man is in between. Bringing these together, it's the reason our meridians run in the wrong directions. Our yang meridians have to bring heaven down. Our yin meridians have to lift earth up. If there's nobody in between to do that, they separate. Yin and yang separate. Everything's done. Of course, this happens as we die individually too. This is that sort of Jue-yin phenomena of separation of yin and yang, where we get cold limbs and yet a hot flushed head, or whatever, is the separating of yin and yang. Our meridians are no longer able to do their job of giving us a cool head and warm feet by lifting yin to the head and descending yang to the feet. The meridians go in the wrong direction from yin and yang, what you would think, because their job is to keep yin and yang together. Right? So we have this, and that's happening as the process of our qi machine. And as I mentioned, one aspect of our qi machine is in and out. We now say Guizhi Tang is the main formula for that. And then this qi machine between our consciousness and our potential is these 5 attributes. The 5 Shen, 5 spirits in the body of Shen. Now, let's talk a minute about, we understand Hun a little bit. It's about reaching out emotionally. We often say, you know, one of the signs of health. Maybe some of you did my Yangsheng lecture, and I said, oh, there are the 6 signs of health. Remember those? 6 signs of health are good sleep, good appetite, good energy, meaning you don't have ongoing fatigue, good sex drive, no pain, and the final one is no excessive emotional outbursts. That's actually telling you the Hun is functioning well. Your emotional manifestation outward is in proportion to the stimulus. You're healthy and so why are they those six? The six are good sleep. That's the Shen can work. You can sleep. Good appetite. The spleen. Here, so you have the heart and the spleen is functioning. Good appetite. Good sex drive. That's from the kidney. That's this potential thing down here at the Jing. No fatigue. That's the lung. That's the qi of the body. And then of course, no pain is a very general thing. Means the qi is circulating. It's very important for us to discuss pain in a class on mental disorders because there is the notion. And it's not just in Chinese medicine. I was so surprised. Some years ago, I was at a lecture by the head of the pain center at the University of San Francisco Medical School. And he said something that's exactly Chinese medicine saying, which is, and he doesn't know anything about China. I talked to him afterward. But it was through his own observation in the chronic pain clinics. And that saying is that pain never exists devoid of emotional content. So we can always say, and why is that? Because in Chinese medicine thinking, the emotions are none other than qi going the wrong way or doing something different. It's not like we can say, oh, we have emotions as a thing over here, we have qi as something else over here, and they're related. They are the same. And so qi flushing up is anger. Anger flushing up is qi flushing up. They're not different. And so you can't help but have qi rising when you're angry. They're the same thing. So anything that makes your qi rise, there's going to be some feeling of anger in there. If your Hun is in good shape, you can control it. You know that it's inappropriate, you don't want to act out that way, so you don't smack your kid. Even though they're doing something that's making your qi rise at that moment. You have control because the Hun is working. The Hun is filtering there in some way, is able to, right? So that brings us to the last one of our healthy factors. No excessive emotional outbursts. We're checking the condition of the liver. When your liver is sick, you can't control your emotions. You display them, even if it's to your detriment. So when you do, if you're prone to do things, even though you know the consequence is not going to be helpful, productive, useful for you, or whatever, I'm so dang mad, I can't help it, I'm going to hit you. That's a liver problem. It's just, Now, if you're so dang angry, you hit him and you don't even know you're doing it, that's a Shen problem. So as I say, the liver is about, the Hun stored in the liver is about emotional regulation and control, hence no excessive emotion. But the Shen is about appropriateness of behavior. There's a difference there. It's knowing right from wrong, knowing how to be, and so, again, an example from pediatrics often is in the throwing of a tantrum. Kids who are angry, aggressive, and so forth is a liver problem. But tantrums often go beyond that. The child sort of checks out. You can't even reason with them. That's usually now, that heat perhaps that is causing the qi to upflush in the liver has now harassed the Shen. And the kid is like not even home anymore. So now we have to clear heart as well as liver to treat that kind of tantrum. And so it was very easy in the classical books to talk about appropriateness of behavior. Because if you have a society where there are very clear norms, any deviation from ability to stick with those norms was seen as Shen disturbance. This is why romantic love was traditionally said to be one of the strongest of the emotional factors disturbing the Shen. Because romantic love always makes you act in inappropriate ways. You don't care what your parents, you can imagine what they're talking about in a classical discussion, right? The parents decide who you're marrying, mostly because they want to join with that particular other family. right? It was all about family exchange, right, with arranged marriages. And often you didn't even meet the person until very late on in the process. The parents were already deciding this was a good union. So you can imagine how romantic love upset those plans for the parents. No, I don't want to marry him. I don't care if he comes from a good family. I don't care if it would be good for our joint businesses that we were together. I love this other guy because he's got a cute haircut. That's like, you know, that's a Shen disturbance. Right? You're acting inappropriately. Right? So it was easy in a classical setting to say what Shen disturbance was. And then, of course, even that gets further compounded the more Confucian you get. Confucius' whole notion was that if we understand proper relationship and we adhere to that, we can see this Confucian influence so much in all the discussions of mental disorders in Chinese medicine, because mental disorders are never defined classically, at least in terms of how you feel inside. It's how you behave on the outside. Totally different than what we tend to do in the West, where I feel depressed is often the first thing the person says. I have a mental disorder. I feel depressed. No. What is the first discussion of depression in Chinese medicine? It's always about withdrawal. It's you're not doing your outward behaviors right. That's the way we define it. I don't care how you feel. That's practically irrelevant. What it is how are you displaying yourself outward? That's what's going to define. And so we don't have depression as a mental disorder in Chinese medicine so much. We do have stagnation as a mental disorder, which people say is kind of like depression. But we talk a lot about withdrawal. Withdrawing the Shen so you're not actively engaged appropriately in your outside relationships and stuff. You're not, you know. So they saw it that way. And that's very Confucian, because Confucius was the way to a happy life, the way to a happy society is everybody finds their appropriate place and does that to their optimum. Doesn't want to be anything else, doesn't want to do anything else. This is what's appropriate for me. It's the job I've inherited from my father. It's the wife that's been picked by my mother. I do all that appropriately. Oh, now everything works perfect. That's a healthy mind. That's the classical view. How does that fit for us? I mean, we have no such notion in modern society. So it's really more difficult to clearly define healthy Shen in terms of appropriateness of behavior, because nobody agrees what's appropriate. And a lot of things that would have been crazy at one time, people think is perfectly fine to do now. You know, and so.
Would it be fair to say that the classical view is more like a behavioralist approach, like Skinner's view of the world, maybe? Not exactly, but that kind of view that everyone has to take their own behavior as their basic responsibility, and that's.
I would go beyond that. It's an interesting point when you talk about behaviorists, because the psychotherapy of traditional Chinese medicine, even as it carries through to now, is all kind of cognitive, behavioral kinds of things. It's acting as if. It's deciding how you want to be or what's appropriate for you and just trying to do that no matter what. That's seen as a way to make your Shen become healthier. And so there is this sort of behaviorist aspect to it, but it's even more, it's like sort of societal behaviorism, in that you're not even picky, you know, or it's not like sort of nature sort of banging you in a certain direction, as behaviorism often is. It's just, you know, reward and punishment sort of direction. It's like that we can come to some kind of collective agreement on what appropriate is, and then your ability to conform to our collective agreement. I think that part is very uncomfortable to modern people, because we're very individualist here, right? We don't like that somebody says the right way for you to be, whether it's because you are a woman or because you're younger or older or because you're whatever. There's a right way for you to be because of who you are. We've decided. Ooh, that's pretty uncomfortable, you know. But I think classically that was a very accepted notion. And so what we see is a lot of mental problems, as their description in ancient times was your inability to engage in that. So withdrawal was one of the typical responses. I feel depressed. I'm just I'm not doing that.
Would it be fair to say that any kind of lack of conformity would be considered antisocial behavior?
Yeah. Yeah, that's definitely Confucian. That anti-conformity is antisocial, and implies you have a Shen disturbance. So I think now what we tend to do is when we apply these categories, we start to think of, is a person's behavior somehow consistent, somehow rational, logical, somehow self-supporting for them? So one example that a lot of teachers use, which it's kind of funny, they talk about, pick the example between a person who's standing on the street corner trying to preach about they're communicating with some spirit versus a person who holds a seminar and is going to communicate with some spirit and give you guidance, and we call it channeling. The same phenomena is present. And a lot of psychologists will say both of these people are crazy. But the one person knows how to charge for it. Therefore, they're able to control it and utilize it in a way that's, right? So the behavior doesn't have to be that far different. I'm going to stand on the screen and yell that I know what, we see the high affect for you. That's the opposite side of the withdrawal, right? We often talk about withdrawal and mania, yin and quang, right? The withdrawal, pulling your Shen inward and disengaging, the quang being overbearing and over-engaging, and of course then everybody immediately jumps, well, geez, they're seeing a kind of manic-depressive phenomena there, aren't they? A tendency to withdraw, a tendency to over-engage, right? So that's one of our basic classics, but really, we could say the Shen is functioning when we know that we somehow can do things like I might have a difference of opinion with you. I can often read how to try to express that, so that I appear reasonable instead of crazy. So my Shen is monitoring that. That's the appropriateness of it. We see a lot of we see a lot of Shen disturbance in a mild way when people act out inappropriately in public settings. And they're otherwise perfectly rational and say, but something happens. They get kind of overstimulated, like it's a classic thing, isn't it? Teachers, making the class upset, making some people feel embarrassed or whatever, totally unintentional. They just can't control it. They always tell off-color jokes and things. I mean, I've been involved in the administration of acupuncture school for a long time, and we have had this problem so often. You'll have these teachers who seem like totally normal, functional people, and you put them in front of a class and they can't, and they become immediately off-color and telling terrible jokes, and half the students are complaining, and you sit them down and you talk to them, and they're like, yeah, I get that. I don't know why. I get, kind of hyped up and nervous and amped up, and I try to get the class on my side, and I start telling jokes. Yeah, but tell nice jokes. Don't tell, sexually oriented. And then the next time they're in front of the class, the same thing comes out of their mouth. What is going on there? We would say that they have Shen disturbance that moment. Usually what's said to happen is they actually have fire agitating the Shen, as we see in a lot of anxiety. They're actually having an anxiety attack in front of the class. And as a reaction to their anxiety attack, and what is anxiety? It's often deficiency above with excess below, and the excess rises up. What they say is happening is the minister fire in the kidney which raises your sexuality also, right, is rising up and harassing the heart. And that's why you talk about sex. It's like it just comes to their mind that the thing that's going to make the class like them in this moment of anxiety is to tell sexual jokes. And in fact, it produces exactly the opposite reaction. Right? That's a ministerial fire from the kidney rising up and harassing the heart. And it's a very common phenomenon with teachers. So they get nervous in front of the class, and the nervousness is depleting the heart, but so that emptiness above, this fire rises up from below. And they could take Wei Chun, because it would direct, or at least they could take God Mai Da Zao Tao, another formula we're going to come to in a minute. But why does Ganmai Dazao Tong work? It seems like it's nothing in there. But it has an astringency that takes that empty heat back down from harassing the heart, and your anxiety is relieved. So, okay, having said that, I think I'll tell a dirty joke. There was a really old guy in the nursing home. It was like 80. Not really. I shouldn't. I'm 57 on Monday, so 80 doesn't sound as far away anymore, you know. But anyway, so there's let's say he's 100 and something. There's this old guy in the nursing home, and it's his birthday, and his grandson says, "I want to send Granddad something special for his birthday. I'm going to get him a prostitute." So he hires this prostitute, and she goes into the nursing home, and the old man's asleep, and the girl bends over and she wakes him up, and he wakes up and sees this beautiful young girl there, and says, "Oh, who are you?" And she goes, "Why, honey, I'm here to give you super sex." And the old man says, "Well, okay, well, then I'll have the soup." See, that's how humor often works, is you're building up excess in the heart. Because, there's this, you don't know what I'm going to say, and especially, I set it up a little bit because we're talking about this. Is he going to tell some terrible sexy joke now after just saying it's a Shen disturbance? And then there's a relief at the end. So that relief is a heart chi moves, and then you laugh. That's the humor. That's why we always say in humor, there is the unexpected appearance. So humor often has it that the punchline of a joke is it has to be something unexpected. If you can guess the punchline, it's not funny anymore because there's no buildup of pressure on the heart chi. So the heart chi builds up as the joke is being, then releases. And then you laugh because that's the sound of the heart coming out. So I could set up that joke by, I hope he doesn't tell somebody too off color now, that would be terrible after just saying it's a Shen disturbance. So you even build up a little more pressure. And then comes a, mild punchline. Oh, what a relief, So anyway, so this gives us now a little background. So when we go through our list here of these terms at the bottom of the page, we say that we have Shen is, in a more limited sense, the part of our psyche that's in our heart and controls our ability to perceive what's appropriate and sort of to behave appropriate to circumstance. Gui is simply a ghost, and there are, we see it in both the Hun and the Po as a component in both the Hun and the Po. And in fact, by the way, the Po is the part that causes hauntings. If you believe in this notion that ghosts can be around, it's not the Shen. Shen doesn't hang around. It's clear, appropriate consciousness. When you die, it's gone. Wherever you can decide. Does it go to another life? Does it go back to the universal mind? Does it go to heaven or hell? That's a religious question. But we can say that the Shen is gone when you die. But the Po, the connection to self, has a lot to do with physical attachment, can remain. And so if there's a visitation after death, the person's spirit comes back. It's not their Shen, it's their Po that's thought to be hanging around. So when we talk about Gui, and you'll see this term is used like in the 13 ghost points, each one of them has a name, some kind of ghost, something, Gui this, Gui that. Ling is another term for ghosts, similar sort of thing. But then we have Hun and Po. Hun is in the liver and is our outward manifestation. Po is in the lung and is our inward physical connection. E is our intellect. It also has something to do with being able to do what we think we want to do. Not in a sense of ambition or something, but being able to carry out our plan. We see a lot of kids with learning disorders where they can't follow directions, where they can't put things in the right order to do them. They can't figure out how to solve the problem. So I guess in a sense we could say it has that problem-solving aspect to it. So when we see a kid with a learning disorder of that type, we see a lot of kids, they're in a particular classroom. They do pretty well. They go to another class, different teacher, they do poorly, often because that teacher in that class where they're doing poorly doesn't give them the tasks with clear direction. And those kids who can't deal with that teacher who doesn't give clear direction, it's because those kids, their E is not functioning well. We give them spleen tonics for that kind of learning disorder. Then we have the Jur as the willpower, ambition, uprightness, like that strength of character. Andrew said something on the drive over this morning about somebody has strong gallbladder because they were able to do certain things.
My friend Charlie Sheen.
Yeah, that's right. You're talking about Charlie Sheen. And, he probably does have a lot of gallbladder heat, but not much Shen. Right? Shen is clearly, that's a good example, isn't it? He's on a radio program the other day with the producer. Like they're cutting him a lot of slack because they're making a lot of money on that show. So they're giving him a lot of latitude. If he could just behave a little bit, he couldn't. But the fact that he could, that's all that heat coming out. He's got a lot of liver and gallbladder heat. So although we say the Jur is in the kidney, it comes outward through your gallbladder. We often say that the gallbladder expresses the kidney yang outward. That's why we see so many issues of lack of self-confidence, shyness, and so forth be associated with the gallbladder. It's an inability to bring your kidney yang out. So yes, the Jur is in the kidney, but other organs can be involved in these kind of problems, and the gallbladder is one of them. We see this again in children a lot. Children who have a lot of shyness or are fearful in social situations. Social anxiety disorders, for example, would be they often have gallbladder problems. And if we can release the obstruction to the gallbladder and then even more tonify the rising yang coming out, then suddenly they become less shy. They'll become more engaged socially. In fact, we do some funny things in treatment for that, like we burn moxa on liver 1 for excessively shy kids. And it actually helps that kidney yang to now come out. But so we say it's that wood, the yang of the wood phase that's bringing the Jur out. Yes, I think too much alcohol, too much cocaine, you probably have liver and gallbladder heat and dampness, right? And so you may feel like acting out is exactly right, but we're going to talk about that this weekend too, is a little bit about the effects of different drugs, because of course this is often seen like in schizophrenia and the bipolar disorder. We often see people who seem quite normal and functional, and then they start to abuse substances, even just in a what would seem to be a fairly moderate or small way, and then wow, it really triggers their bipolar presentation or something. And so if we look at different drugs and what they do, for example, I think I might have that case on it was a young boy who was just using marijuana but had bipolar disorder. That's very significant because usually we say pot is a qi regulator first, and it actually moves qi stagnation, which doesn't sound like too bad of a thing if a person would have bipolar with all this mania and heat building up. That tells you something about the kind of bipolar he must have. If it's cocaine, on the other hand, cocaine raises yang and depletes heart yin. Depletes heart and kidney yin, as many stimulant drugs do. So its effect is different than marijuana. What is the long-term effect of qi regulators? If you put a person on qi regulators for a long time, they end up blood deficient, don't they? So we can guess people who react negatively to qi regulators often have blood deficiency. Now, I mean, there are other possibilities, like sometimes they have a lot of heat being held back by the qi constraint that releases. But often we will find, and in fact, this could be a kind of trigger. Person who has some blood deficiency takes a qi regulating drug and actually then has some kind of mental break. So it's kind of interesting to look at different drugs and what impact they have on the qi of the body. So yes. yes, if cocaine is lowering heart yin, and of course the fire becomes more exaggerated. Let's get through the list here, and then we'll take a little break. I got the sign for the hook back there. And Ed is going to come with one of those things and pull me in a minute. Then we have the heart here. It's important to recognize that because the Shen is said to be housed in the heart, this term heart gets used a lot in mental disorders as a kind of a replacement for Shen. So we often see, Sheen this, Sheen that. Mental disorders could often be called Sheen Bing, heart sickness, or in regards to what we just talked about, there's a Chinese word, Xin Dan. Xin Dan is heart gallbladder, and that's an expression that means courage. So when your heart and gallbladder are somehow connected, that's that yang coming up from the kidney. You have courage, There's also a word, Shingan, I think of it now. Shingan is heart-liver, and that sort of means having a conscience. That's kind of interesting, huh? It might be that, as we often say, the yang aspects of wood are about bringing out ambition and bringing it outward, whereas we always say the yin aspects of the wood phase are about internalizing your emotions. So, for example, if we have constrained anger, that's a liver problem, whereas outwardly acting aggressive anger is a gallbladder problem. So probably the liver functioning normally, you do have some internal self-reflection, so you have a sense of conscience. Whereas the gallbladder acting, you have outward courage. Now, it's very important because that's brain. In a minute, as we come back to the break, we're going to talk about this chi machine a little more. And the brain is really important here and is clearly recognized as somehow involved with our Shen. So you often hear people say, Chinese medicine doesn't think much about the brain, and the brain isn't so important. It's some kind of storehouse of reserves, but really we see a lot of discussion about the brain as the sea of marrow, containing a lot of our deep substance. And therefore, if that's blocked, we often have unclear thinking and senility and can't remember and all of that, especially as brain problems go towards kidney and Jing depletion. The brain is really clearly recognized there. So we'll talk about schizophrenia. Often we see triggering for schizophrenia often follows head trauma. And this would be blood stagnation in the brain. Brain, heart, the base formula, of course, is shui fu zhu yutang. A heart blood stagnation formula, but where is it really stagnated is in the brain, so it's head trauma triggers. The last one on your list might be useful. GE is memory. And E, you see the E there, showing that, and this is a specific kind of memory. It's memory of facts. Okay, so now we have some idea of the terms, and we're going to use those for different problems. So let's take a break for a few minutes.